Chris Cooper is a hero for Star Trek fans. I say Trekkies. Once at a bar in Al's Kitchen, this guy told me that real fans say Trekkers, not Trekkies, which is like the most gatekeeping thing like I can imagine. But I've always said Trekkies. I don't know. Isn't there a movie about the fans like called Trekkies, like a self-made film? I don't know. You can say whatever you want. That's how identities work. Anyway, I'm definitely not an expert by any means, but I do consider myself an enthusiast. So I was excited when I read all about Chris Cooper's history as a writer. Chris Cooper, obviously, the man who had a run-in with Karen, Amy Cooper, the most high-profile Karen at the moment, besides Karen McInerney, who has been recently saying that mail-in votes cause voter fraud, and who has also managed to vote, I think, 10 times by mail in the last couple of years. So very impressive Karens all around. But you know this story. It's the Ramble. It's Central Park. And, this Karen, I don't want to call her Karen Cooper because I don't think that she makes barrels. Probably makes barrels of cash. But let's say Karen Financier, she's in the Ramble. Well, she's not going to make barrels of cash anymore because she was just fired by Franklin Templeton. Let's call her Karen Templeton because Templeton is the rat from Charlotte's Web. And she's snitching like a rat. So she has her dog in the Ramble, and the Ramble is for two things, and one of them is bird watching, and the other is not having your dog off leash. So she caused this whole problem. So I think Chris Cooper is a legend, just for telling this person off because she was causing a potential issue. The height of hubris is thinking that the rules don't apply to you, especially rules that are put in place for public health. But I don't really want to talk about that. You guys all know about that by now. Let's talk about Chris Cooper's writing for the Star Trek comic from 1996 that Marvel put out, Starfleet Academy, which featured Nog from Deep Space Nine. I remember this comic vaguely. I certainly didn't remember who had written it. I read about this from like a Google alert, but the covers are really cool. Like I really like the art of the covers because it has this like 90s sort of like Eric Larson kind of vibe to it. And that's my era of comics. I grew up in the 90s, so I'm gonna like that stuff. Obviously the art inside isn't quite as great as the covers because that's how it works. But Chris Cooper wrote, I think, the whole run of this show for the most part. Of this comic book, and the artists were let's see, Renault, I believe, Chris Renault and Andy Lansing. But anyway, it's all on a website I think called readallcomics.com, which I don't know. I'm not sure if there's copyright on any of it, but it's all up there now. It's 20 years old. But the cool thing I don't remember the stories going on in these comics necessarily, but Chris Cooper wrote the first openly LGBTQ plus human, I guess, that's what it says on Memory Alpha, so first human, in Star Trek, which is ridiculous because Star Trek had been out in various iterations for 30 years at this point. So like there should have been that kind of representation before, but at least he put it in there. And this character, Yoshi Mishima, wasn't even a main character, but I'm sure that wasn't Chris Cooper's fault. I'm sure he was trying to work with what was possible in terms of like the editing board and stuff like that. So at least shout out to pre-Disney Marvel for least having that kind of representation, like however minor, in the late 90s. And then a big fu to current Marvel, for like having no representation in their movies, 20 whatever movies in. I know supposedly like we're gonna get one with the next, with Thor 4, but like, it should have. You don't really need that long to get there. And then like a big fu to Disney, because for Star Wars, because they don't care about having any kind of representation like that in the movies, because all they care about is making money in China, etc. And Ike Perlmutter sucks, so like I don't know. That's that. So like Nog is in there, so it's connected to the Deep Space Nine continuity, the Starfleet Academy comics, the Marvel run from the 90s, but I guess it's not even considered canon. But I mean, that's a big, step forward for the 90s. Like, obviously they didn't get to that kind of stuff on TV until like Discovery, Star Trek Disco, which came out like 3 years ago, which has good representation and has like, I mean, I like the show. Excuse me, I like the show. It's basically like there's a lot going on there. They tried to take like the cool aspects of DS9 and Voyager, and then basically make Game of Thrones in space too. There's like a little bit too much going on, maybe. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I haven't finished season 2, really. Disco's not my favorite. DS9 is my favorite Star Trek. But shout out to Chris Cooper for his work for the culture, like the nerd culture. And shout out for him calling out Karen Templeton, because not having your dog on a leash where you should, like I said, it's a public health issue, and if you are a pet owner and you're taking your pet out, your first priority should be that pet's safety. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, I see this a lot more in New York, and it's very hubristic than I ever did when I was a kid. People put their dogs on leashes when I was a kid, like, but now, and I think it's some kind of hubris where people are like, and some kind of like anthropomorphism, like people projecting like, oh, well, I want the dog to be free and stuff like that. Like, well, unless it's like a really ridiculously well-trained dog, like here's the like the metric for whether you should keep your dog on a leash or not. Will your dog stop or go on command, on a verbal command? Like literally stop in its tracks if you say stop, and then go when you say go. Like, if not, then leash your dog when you're outside in public, when you're out in a public park. Like, I would say maybe 10% of people I see with their dogs off leash out on the street or out in parks, like, satisfy that criterion. Because if your dog is off leash, it's not just about the safety of your dog, but safety of other dogs, safety of children, like everything that's going on. If your dog's off leash and I have my dog on a leash, if your dog comes over and scares my dog and my dog bites yours because my dog is scared, then you're gonna, Karen Templeton, you're gonna take your, high profile, like very wealthy lawyers and then come at me and like turn this whole thing around, like, and etc. If you have your child running around the park and like it runs over to, an unleashed dog runs over to it and like bites the kid, like there's going to be issues. There's going to be, like legal issues. There's going to be issues for both of those dogs. Like, you don't care about animals if you're doing something like that, in my opinion. And I'll say this, like, her dog was taken away. The video, it was upsetting the way she was handling the dog. Obviously, it's not the most upsetting thing about the video. The most upsetting thing is that she was clearly hoping to get Chris Cooper in a dangerous situation for him by making false accusations about him to the authorities. Like, but watching the video, she's doing that while she's like, like holding the dog by its collar, like, which is ridiculous. Like, why? There's like no one else around. Like, if you have to be on your phone, and don't be on your phone when you're walking your dog, like, in general. But if you have to be on your phone calling the police, like, hold the dog on a leash, like, like a normal person. She's like got the dog by the neck, and it's awful. And so she had to give this dog back to the rescue that she got it from, which is very upsetting, because I want that dog to be in a good home. But just goes to tell you that, like, and this is just my opinion, from what I've seen. But honestly, rich people don't take that good care of their pets. They might buy the really expensive dog food and stuff for them, but they really don't care because they pretty much lack the empathy to take good care of an animal. Like, and this was just an example of that. If you're not well off and you are thinking about adopting a pet, a cat, a dog, a rabbit, or whatever, dive in there. Like, you know, maybe you only have 2 nickels to rub together or whatever. You know, there are plenty of groups out there that if you adopt a dog or a cat, like, they can help you out with food. Like, that dog is better off in your house than it is in a shelter. Like, and I'm not saying go out there and adopt, you know, if you 10 dogs or 10 cats or 10 rabbits. Like, if you don't have the finances to do that, then yeah, don't. But, like, you know, you might not think you can afford a cat or a dog, but that dog, like, or cat, you know, maybe you have to give them the, you know, whatever store brand dog or cat food. Like, they're better off in your home if you have a lot of love to give than they are in a shelter. Like, and they're better off with you, even if you don't have any money, than they are with, you know, Karen Templeton. Probably, like, as we can see, it's just an example of that kind of thing. So I mean, those are a couple of my thoughts, and like, there's a lot of issues going on here. And, you know, some people, you know, this video is for young people pretty much, like, for the most part, or Trek fans, or it's for whoever. But this next part, I'm going to be talking to young people. And, you know, like, here's the thing about, like, making a false claim like that to the police. Like, the thing about the authorities and the police, if you're a POC, is that you cannot trust the authorities. Like, and this goes back to ideas about, like, game theory and prisoner's dilemma. And if you're a sci-fi enthusiast and don't know much about game theory or prisoner's dilemma, go read up on it. You know, whatever, read the Wikipedia pages about it. Like, get a grasp on this, and I mean, it'll help you. Your reading or your watching of sci-fi, like, things will make a lot more sense. But also, if you want to write sci-fi or something like that, these things come up all the time, right? It's like these sort of, like, choices that we make of who to trust. You know, basically, like, prisoner's dilemma says that, like, if there are 2 prisoners and they're in, you know, separate rooms and they're both being interrogated, like, their best bet is to assume that the other person is going to sell them out. So basically, like, if you are being oppressed or you're, you know, being subjugated, basically, if you're not in a position of power, then your best bet for survival is to not trust the authorities. And so it's like that. This is the way that a lot of people who aren't in positions of power have to live their lives, and this is what, like, white privilege is about. You don't get subjected to this. You know, The Dark Knight is, like, a classic example, right? I mean, it's not the exact situation of prisoner's dilemma, but it's the people who, you know, they're not being oppressed or whatever, but and some of them are prisoners. That's not what I mean. But there's two people in the boat, right? And there's a bunch of people. They're in separate boats. They have to choose whether to hit the, like, explosive thing or not, right? It's this sort of, like, and game theory is a lot more complicated than that. But the game theory is sort of based on how do we make decisions like this, and it comes up in Star Trek all the time. The biggest thing is, like, Kieran Reese, right? Kieran Reese is part of the Bajorans who are subjugated by the Cardassians, right? So Kira doesn't trust any Cardassians, and I'm not talking about this from, like, for now. I'm not talking about, like, the Cardassians as, like, a separate race, but, like, the Cardassian military, which is, like, kind of like all of Cardassia, right? Because they're fascists. And that's the thing about Star Trek, is, like, the politics of Star Trek are, like, they're pretty straightforward. Like, the Bajorans are subjugated by the Cardassians. The Cardassians are fascists. They're basically Nazis. Like, there's no question about that. If you watch the show, like, that's what's going on, the subtext. So Kira doesn't trust, you know, anyone who's involved with the Cardassian military, which is everyone. Kira, like, basically doesn't even trust the Federation because they've sort of made a pact with they made peace with the Cardassians, which is how they got, at least in the beginning of the show, right? It's how they get Torok Nar or Deep Space Nine. So if you want to be an empathetic person, which you should, recognize that POCs all across the world, but in America, they are in a similar situation that Kira is in, that the Bajorans are in. They can't trust any of the Cardassians. Kira doesn't trust Garrick, for instance, even though Garrick is like, the best character, but Kira certainly doesn't trust, any of them. And I don't know. It's just if you're a young person, like, empathy is a good thing. Like, and Star Trek teaches empathy. So keep watching Star Trek. People are going to tell you that you shouldn't be an SJW, or people are going to tell you that you should see both sides of it. But like, both sides are not equal in politics, ever. There's always politics of subjugation, unfortunately, especially in capitalism, especially in corporatism. And Star Trek being like the post-scarcity society, it's supposed to show us like ideals. But of course, like, by the time they get to DS9, like, the post-scarcity thing is different, right? Because like, the Bajorans need things. Like, they meet other groups of beings who like are without, that they need things, and that makes for better stories. The fact that someone needs something is what I mean, not that people are subjugated. Like, that's never good. So try to learn as much as you can about game theory if you're a young person interested in sci-fi. Shout out to Mr. Cooper. I'm gonna check out those comics. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm almost done with Voyager, actually, which I'm really excited about. I'm planning on watching Picard. So, anyone, feel free to hit me up if you have any questions about this, or about how these things relate to each other. And we need justice for George Floyd. Black Lives Matter. Brown Lives Matter. Live long and prosper. Thanks for watching.